Hello, I'm Daniel von Fange. Some of you may know me from Twitter, where I posted a lot of breakdowns of hacks, and it's something I've been doing often for the last 2.5 years. So I got here early, and I was wandering around town, and I ran across a huge military display for National Day with tanks and APCs, and they were letting like 5-year-old kids run the gun turrets on the stuff, and piles of helicopters on the grass that all took off and flew over the city. But that made me think of World War II. And in World War II, the Americans lost tens of thousands of aircraft. But they also didn't lose tens of thousands of aircraft, and they just got holes in them. And so whenever, all over the world, American airplanes got holes in them, as part of the maintenance report, they would fill out forms about where the hole was and send it home, and it would go to Washington and get tabulated. And so they had a professor look at this list of holes that were in the airplanes and try to figure out what they needed to do to change the airplanes, kind of a system for finding out how to improve the airplanes so they got shot down less by looking at the holes that were in the airplane. Now, there's one really interesting thing that's makes total sense once you understand it, but is a little unintuitive at first, is that a hole in an airplane that got back to base is a hole that did not shoot the airplane down. And so what you actually needed to do is, instead of thinking, hey, there's a whole bunch of holes here in airplanes that are coming back, I need to put more armor there, is these are the places that it's fine to get holes and you're okay, and it's the places that never come back with holes are the places you need either more armor or more redundancy. And so a lot of times people learn defending a smart contract by looking at audit reports. And to some extent, audit reports are like those holes in the airplanes. Those are the ones that got caught. And so the big thing is, what are the attacks that did not get caught? I'm good. I don't know how to show anything yet. They're the ones that did not get caught. And so what you want to, or one really powerful way to learn about the ones that get through all the processes and the tools and the test is to study the actual hacks that happen. There's a second really kind of powerful thing. I'm a bit of a nerd, so one day I took a spreadsheet and I made a list of every natural disaster or like personal disaster I could think of, and I ranked it by how likely it was to happen and how much I need to do to prepare for it, and how much I could mitigate it, because I'm a nerd. And so I got to tornadoes, and I tried to figure out how likely I was to get hit by a tornado. And so I went through lots of weather data and I analyzed the tornadoes in my area. And while I was doing this, I was hit by a somewhat completely unrelated realization, which is, in my area, somebody within a mile or two of myself is 600 times more likely to get hit by a tornado than I am, just because there's lots of people around me, and any random tornado going through my area probably isn't going to hit me. It's going to hit somebody else first, or hit somebody else. And so when you're working with, if you really want to defend a protocol or really want to stay on the cutting edge of hacks, the odds are somebody else is going to get hit before you are. So it really comes down to learning from these new things that come out. And that's another area where learning from hacks is really useful. So what we're going to do today is actually break down, we're going to take, it's not my favorite hack of all time, but it kind of has the funniest story, the platypus hack, which the hacker was actually counter-hacked afterwards because they did such, and they also locked up all their funds afterwards and then were counter-hacked. So we're going to get back to that in just a second and actually break down how to do this. So as an auditor or as a protocol, your end goal is to understand the vulnerable code that made the hack. Because if you're an auditor, that's what you want to be able to look for in future auditors, and if you're a protocol, that's what you want to make sure you don't have and don't write in the future. But so how do you get there from just having like a transaction hash or something? There's 4 or 5 different ways you could potentially dig in to find what actually happened. So there's the funds, flow of funds, and this shows up on Etherscan. There's the events that are emitted during the transaction. You could decompile the attacker's contract and work through that. You could go spend time reading the victim contract and understand how that all works. Or you can work off the execution trace. And actually, working off the execution trace is massively better than every single one of those other ones. Because once you understand what happened, it's usually pretty obvious where in the victim code you need to look to find where the bug is. So I am going to give this a shot now and try showing you how to work through a hack. Let's see how this goes. There's very bad or no Wi-Fi here. So I'm going to try this out. If anything goes wrong, I have some backup screenshots I'll use. So kind of step one of working through a hack is you got to have the transaction trace. But I would always start with a notepad document, or some kind of text document that you can put links to. You can, when you dig up what a contract is, you can put its address and then what it is, and kind of your understanding as you go through it. Oftentimes you get part of the way through and you realize you need to go back and look something else up. And if you've got it written down, it's a really simple process. Otherwise, it's really aggravating. All right. So the first step is get the transaction hash. This is sometimes it'll just be posted by PEC Shield. Sometimes you'll have to go look at the contract and look at the transactions that interacted with it. But once you have the transaction hash, my favorite tool is Sam Z. Sun's tool, openchain.xyz. There's also Falcon by BlockSec Team. These are probably the top 2 transaction tracing tools right now. And so I'm just going to demo with Sam's tool here. And kind of what you want to find out is kind of get the lay of the land on the contracts is one of the first things you want to do for a hack. And so for this particular, or for any hack, this tool will show you kind of how the value changed between these different addresses over the course of the transaction. And so in this case, this address right here ended up with $40 million more than it started out with. And we can also see that that's the initial contract that was called. The attacker named it hello. And that's going to be our attacker contract. Most hacks happen from a contract, and so that's our attacker contract. Now, what you can do with this tool is you can actually rename this thing. Oh, hey, I've got Wi-Fi. That's a good start. Let's try again. And now, through the rest of this call trace, whenever the attacker does something, it shows what it is. Now, if I expand this thing out enough, this thing will get absolutely huge once we look through, or even if I were to expand out these things, small things. So one big powerful thing you can do when understanding a hack is focus in. Attacks almost always follow kind of the same patterns. First, they set up, get a bunch of money from a flash loan. Then usually they put the contract in a bad state. Then they exploit that bad state. And then they swap out funds, repay the flash loan, do a whole bunch of other work. And so you can usually just skip down in through like a flash loan happening and execution. In this one, I think there may have been 2 flash loans that happened. But anyway, at the end of the day, it gets back into the attacker's execution. So we're going to skip that first part. And if we look down at the bottom of this, a lot of the stuff that's happening back here, like handle repayment and stuff, is also the flash loan. So in here, we kind of have to go through and figure out what happened and what went weird. And we also kind of need to find out what these names are of these different contracts. We can see that things are happening in here. But are you guys able to see the screen enough? I can see, yeah, not really. It's pretty bad. It's pretty rough. So here I see a deposit happening. And that's kind of an important thing that's going on. So I can expand that out. And let's see. I expanded the wrong one. I can see that it's happening on a contract named pool. And so I'm just going to make the rest of this easy and save you guys time. I looked up that contract on Etherscan, and I know it's their pool contract. So I'll just call it pool. And then if I go down to the next thing that's important, a deposit happens. Okay, it's the master platypus before. This is just, I'm putting the names of the contracts onto their proxies. My finger is sticky because it's warm in here. So if we kind of ignore all the other stuff that's going on here, what we have is we have a deposit. The funds from this pool are actually deposited into the master pool. And then from the master pool, we do an emergency withdrawal, and then a regular withdrawal. Because I'm running low on time, I won't actually break down through that. But where it goes weird here is this emergency withdrawal, and emergency withdrawals are often where strange things happen. So what you do when you have, once I've identified that emergency withdrawal as where all of a sudden, after all this, the attacker has double the money, is I go in and look at the actual code for emergency withdrawal. And I'm going to bring this over here. Is this emergency withdrawal? No. Let's see. All right, here's emergency withdrawal. And again, for time reasons, because almost out of time, I'm going to skip actually how it worked out through this. But what's happening in here is they check that the user is solvent and then allow them to pull their money. But this does not take into account if the user has borrowed any funds. And so this is like the equivalent of going to your bank, depositing $1 million, asking to borrow $900,000, and then saying, hey, I need to withdraw my $1 million. And they say, well, you have $1 million and you're solvent and your account's in good standing. Here's your money. And so they basically doubled their money in doing this. So that's kind of how you get down to where the bug actually happened. Questions? All right. Yes. Good.
Can you speak here? All right. Thanks for the talk. Are there any online resources where we can go through this in more detail, what you just showed here?
I don't know that anybody's, other than myself, has really explained it. I guess you just give it a shot and try it. You know, you can, a lot of times people will say on Twitter where the bug happened. And so you can kind of work your way, simulate your own run, knowing where it's going to be, and work your way to understanding it that way.
Got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. One really useful thing is to always actually get your eyes on the bug in the code, because a lot of times things won't actually work out exactly how you thought they did, and sometimes descriptions of how hacks worked on Twitter actually don't match how they exactly act.
Could you talk a bit more about the hack the hacker part if you mentioned? Is that, you think it's
Okay.
more common, or is that just a lazy attacker trend?
So yeah, this is a great story. And so this attack happened, and they put no way in the immutable attack contract to withdraw the funds. So all of this money is locked forever in this contract. However, BlockSec team looked at this and realized that the attacker made a mistake. In that attack sequence, the attacker made a flash loan, or he got a flash loan. The flash loan called back into the contract with some funds, and then the attack contract started executing. It basically took the funds that it had received, and it put it all into the protocol to do all the stuff. So there was no authentication on that flash loan calling, or that call that the flash loan made coming back in. And so what they did is they upgraded the Platypus contracts. They then called the flash loan thing but gave it no money. And so it took all the money that it had and went back to deposit and run through that exact sequence that was coded into it. But because they had changed the protocol code just took the money and ran at the end of the day instead of giving them anything back. And so they got back all their USDC that was hacked out. And then the attacker had used an account that was linked with his name on another thing. You could go see all his scores in first-person shooter games. And he was arrested. Actually, it was 2 guys arrested in Paris very shortly thereafter. So it is the single worst attacker of all attackers of all DeFi attack history was this particular hack.
One thing I find interesting is that 99% of the time the code is public. So it's supposed to also be on the user to double check what they are using before using it. This usually doesn't happen because users are under the false assumption that if it's public, someone else have checked it. And with a great effort put by the space into the UE user experience and in general the front end, it's really easy for the user to do even very complex things. Okay, so do you think this is solvable at this point? Like the users not checking what they are using and
So I've got, yeah, two things. As far as will a user be able to know if any general contract is secure? Absolutely not. If somebody just makes some code and throws it out there. However, I think there's some standards coming from auditors where the auditors can actually vouch not only that they audited the contracts, but that the contracts that you're actually using are the ones the auditors audited instead of just, they got an audit and they changed the code later. And so, I think in the future, it will be easy to tell for big name protocols that someone has actually vouched for the code that's actually running. It'll be better than it is today. But for anybody, no, there's nothing that even as a protocol, you can't be sure that you've got the code right, so much less a user. All right, I'll catch you. All right, thank you.